Right, if we're all ready. Welcome to the February budget meeting of our council. Before we start, the usual short announcement about the procedure in case of a fire alarm. A fire drill is not due to take place. Therefore, if the alarm sounds, people should leave the building, move by the nearest exit and disperse away from the site for 20 minutes. Before we start the meeting, could we just stand for a moment's reflection? Thank you very much. Thank you. At this stage, we were due to hear from Mr. Pim van Barsen, who is the Chief Executive of the Silverstone Cluster and is responsible for the industries that have grown up around Silverstone in the last few years, most of which are high technology industries. And he's got some really interesting remarks about development of high technology businesses in our county. As you guessed, unfortunately, he's not well. He's got viral pneumonia and has had to cancel at the very last moment. So I'm sure we wish him well, and hopefully we should be able to see him at the next council meeting. But we shall have to unfortunately forego that this morning. And that will take us back to our agenda, and apologies for the inability to attend the meeting. Councillor Suresh Patel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And apologies from Councillor Annabel de Capel-Brook, Andre Gonzalez, Mike Hallam, Amy Howard, Dudley Hughes, Sylvia Hughes, Andy Kilbride, Kristen Smith-Haynes, Jonathan Eakins, and Judy Shaffers. And Councillor Martin Griffiths will be joining us a little later. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McGee.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies from Councillor Strachan, Councillor Hales and Councillor Brookfield.
Thank you. Councillor Stamborough.
All present and correct, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Have we any non-aligned independent councillors apologising?
We're not a group and we're not apologising.
Thank you, Councillor Hakewell. The minutes of the meeting of the 21st of November, which are set out in pages 5 to 20 of your notes. Anyone, any comments or issues of the minutes? Is it my wish that I sign the minutes for you? Thank you very much. Declaration of interest by councillors. I know that you're all fully aware of this. I'm not going to read it out, but has anyone any interest to declare? Thank you very much. Chairman's announcements. I've got one basic announcement about that I intend to hold a civic garden party this year at Delaprey Abbey, and it's going to be on April the 18th, a Saturday afternoon from 2 o'clock, and it's going to be an opportunity for us to meet together. I know it's just at the beginning of Purdah, but I think it will be hopefully a welcome relief from electioneering, and we can join together for 2 or 3 hours in Delaprey Park. The Borough Council are really keen, of course, to showcase the area that they've just spent a considerable amount of money on redeveloping, and are giving us the opportunity to look around the building and everything as well. And we are also going to have some local charities who are going to demonstrate and tell us about their activities. So I think we're going to have a really good afternoon, and I do urge everyone that can to come to that event. And I've also invited our district and borough councillors as well, so that we can sort of all get to know each other in a convivial way. Thank you. 2 other announcements about our meeting today. In line with the legislation that came into effect in February 2014, all decisions on the budget are subject to a recorded vote. So this morning we're scheduled to have 2 votes, both of which will be a recorded vote. I'd also remind councillors there are certain rules of procedure which apply only to the budget meeting. Otherwise, the meeting will be run according to the usual rules of procedure. The only amendments that may be moved are those notified to the monitoring officer under Rule 15.7. Council is reminded that multiple amendments may be submitted in the form of an alternative budget or as a list of amendments, but will be proposed, seconded and debated as if they were a single amendment. We come on now to an update from the Children's Commissioner, which is our item 6, and we're really pleased to see Mr. Andrew Christie, who's going to introduce the report about the Children's Commissioner's activities. Mr. Christie?
Thank you very much, Chair. I move over there, do I? I'm being prompted to kind of move. As I'm also going to ask my assistant, Commissioner Claire Chamberlain, to join in answering questions, and she will perhaps...
Yeah, that'd be really useful, yeah.
Can I say, first of all, thank you very much indeed for inviting me to the Council meeting today to give me the opportunity to tell you a little bit about progress that's being made with regard to addressing the need to improve children's services in the county, and to say a little bit more about what my views are about the next steps to be taken, but most importantly, provide the opportunity for members to ask questions of me. And I think, I'm not quite sure whether we've received advance notice of questions from 3 members, and in discussion with the Chair, my understanding is that we'll approach that by asking those members to ask their questions. And then I think, Chair, you may also provide the opportunity for some follow-up questions from other members as they arise. In advance of the discussion that's the meeting today, we prepared a paper which I trust that all members have had a chance to kind of look at in advance of the Council meeting today. So I don't propose to go through the detail of those questions, but other than just to kind of make a few marks by way of introduction. I was appointed as the Commissioner by the Secretary of State about 4 months ago. And I have to say, by way of introduction, that I've been made very welcome in that role. I've experienced plenty of opportunity for challenge and questioning since my arrival, but that's exactly what I would expect to take place, because the issues relating to kind of children's services are quite obviously such a high priority, quite rightly, for the County Council and indeed other stakeholders. I'm about to send a letter, my first report to the Secretary of State. I hope that I can make that letter public, but essentially the letter will be saying pretty much what we say in the report. What the report does is describes says a little bit about what a trust is. It says a little bit about why the decision has been made to put a trust in place in Northamptonshire. It says a little bit about what some of the benefits we expect to arise, but it also acknowledges and recognises that this is not a straightforward new arrangement, and that there will be many questions, and there will be some difficulties and challenges that need to be overcome. I've just to say a little bit about progress, my observations about progress so far. We've had the benefit of a first monitoring visit from Ofsted. Any local authority that is in intervention in special measure, regarded as being inadequate, receives a regular programme of monitoring visits on a quarterly basis throughout the period that those children's services remained in judgment to be inadequate. And as I say, Ofsted will come every quarter and carry out an inspection of different bits of different parts of the service. And I would commend to you that as one very good way of being able to kind of track and monitor what kind of progress has been made. It's reassuring that in the first monitoring visit, which isn't necessarily a published, that doesn't result in a published letter, but subsequently all the other monitoring visits will be result in a kind of published letter. But what that did find, the focus was particularly on the way that the service is dealing with referrals of children and families where there were concerns about vulnerability. And what that report did find that the service had been stabilised, good progress had been made with addressing the issue of unallocated cases, such as there were none when Ofsted came. Good progress was being made in terms of stabilising the workforce, turning around and recruiting more permanent staff. So generally speaking, some kind of very encouraging findings. But I would want to stress and reiterate that they would make the point, and I would absolutely endorse that. These are just very first steps down what will be a long and difficult road towards a position whereby we can really be confident about the safety of children and families across the county. There will be setbacks, so I think I would predict that from time to time there will be issues identified by Ofsted and indeed by officers and indeed by other agencies where not enough progress is being made in particular areas. It will be really important that we continue to be really clear about, what's working, but what isn't working, and where changes need to be made. The second thing to say, and which again we address in the report, is that we're now taking the steps to put in place the arrangements for the trust. So you will be aware that we've already been able to appoint the chair of the trust. Mr. Ian Currier, who is currently Chief Executive of Nottingham City Council, has a background in children's services, was himself previously Director of Children's Services for Nottingham City Council, so understands and knows the area that we're talking about. We're in the middle, and I know there are some questions that relate to this, of the recruitment for the appointment of the Chief Executive of the Trust. We're also in the middle of the recruitment and appointment of some of the non-executive directors. The target for the start for the Trust is an ambitious one. We're aiming for a start in July. I would say at this point that if there is to be any slippage, we cannot afford very much by way of slippage, because with all the other things that need to happen in terms of local government reorganisation in the county, it seems to me it's really important that we get the kind of trust in place, which will then kind of free up some of the capacity, for example, that the county council needs to address the other aspects of local government reorganisation. The trust as an organisation will be established initially as a wholly owned company, wholly owned by the county council. The ownership of that trust will then transfer to the two new unitary authorities on vesting day. The county council and then the succeeding two new unitary authorities will still remain the accountable bodies in respect of the children's services. There'll still be a legislative requirement that the County Council has and the unitary authorities have, a lead member and a director of children's services that they can identify as the person responsible for the kind of leadership of services across the whole system. Because the other point I'd want to make at this point is that, of course, we're talking with the establishment of the trust as an enterprise that is dedicated solely to the delivery of children's social care services. That, of course, means, as members will know well, that there remain a significant range of other services relating to children, families and education that will remain within the kind of direct line management control of the County Council and thereafter the two unitary authorities. And as everybody knows, successful safeguarding and protection arrangements for children and families is not just the business of those delivering the social care services, it is also the business of the kind of wider children's service system within any county, within any council. It's also the business of key partner agencies, police, health, schools at the forefront, but other agencies having very key roles to play. It's also the business of the entire community as well. So children's social care services cannot succeed in isolation. They can only succeed and prosper if they're working very closely in partnership with the other agencies. And drawing on my own experience of chairing a trust in another part of the country, I can tell you that the trust has to play its part as one of the kind of partner agencies in the overall range of services that are being delivered within the local authority or local authorities going forward. It has to be, it's obviously a kind of central player in that, but it is only one player, and it remains the case that overall place leadership for services for vulnerable children and young people actually remains in the hands of the local authority, or going forward in this case, the two unitaries. So I hope I've just begun by kind of setting a little of the kind of scene. As I said, there's a bit more detail set out in the paper that we've circulated in advance. And Chair, now, with your permission, I think it would be kind of appropriate moment to open it up to questions.
Right. Okay, thank you very much for that. Thank you. The Commissioner asked to have questions submitted to him in advance, and 3 questions have been submitted. And I'd like to ask those people to give us their questions. Councillor McGee, could you start us off?
Thank you, Chairman. As a business manager, I collated these questions on behalf of our shadow spokesman for Children's Services, and that's Councillor Birch, so she will be given the questions.
Thank you very much. Could I just ask Claire Chamberlain, who's my colleague commissioner, to come and join me, because I think she'll be answering some of the questions as well. We'll have to stand and do a kind of double lap movement.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Christie, for the information that you've given this morning, as well as the report that you have sent to us. One of the things that I've highlighted to myself from what you've just recently said was about the fact that the Children's Trust will only be looking specifically at the children's services. As corporate parents, as councillors, we know that there are a tremendous number of children within the county who fall between education and children's services, and they are probably some of the most vulnerable. Are disabled children, children who are attending pupil referral units, children who don't have will fall between the two services. So I'd like to know where those children will be, where the needs of the children will be addressed. I mean, I have some other questions too. Do you want to take them in sequence or all at once?
Do you want to ask us a series of them?
Yes, yes, indeed. Yes, yes. Right. Some of them are more general, and some are quite specific. Given that, how do we ensure that it is possible, giving the damage? We recognise that not all trusts are successful. So it is important that the right skills and experience is needed to deal with this and make it a success for our children. Given that, how do we ensure that it's possible, given the damage on Northamptonshire's reputation? So it is about appointing and retaining the right staff. It said trusts often attract better leaders. So will it cost more for senior figures than at present? Given stability is the key to success, how will the new trust ensure that this happens? We have a history in this authority of degree of instability in our leaders. Doncaster has been held up as a success, but the governance changed to bring more say to the council. Should we not start where elected members have more say? Sandwell's Cabinet last year accepted a report to give their trust the additional funds of £5 million to help fill a budget deficit. How do we ensure this does not happen and the trust is properly funded at the outset? And given that we've seen a number of trusts fail, what are the lessons we should learn from that? And then, to go back to my opening points, virtual school, where will that sit? Who will monitor homeschooling, family welfare inclusion units, pupil referral units? Where will their attendance and progress be monitored? And will the Trust develop local homes for looked after children rather than out-of-county placements? Where will the early years board sit? And where will the staff be based? A big question that many of the staff are asking, and again, we'd like some certainty on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. So let me work through those questions, and at some points I'll ask Claire to kind of pick up some of the issues. So can I just take the first point that you made about, so what, in a sense, you came back to this in your questions towards the end. So what will happen in terms of the arrangements for the children that you described as being between the services? And, you know, so how will we make sure that the kind of interests of those children are properly safeguarded? So let me, and you made specific reference, for example, to disabled children. So let me just take that as an example. Before I answer all the questions, can I just say something about some of the kind of general principles? So at the moment, there is something called a Memorandum of Understanding that has been drafted, drawn up, agreed and signed between the Department for Education and the County Council, which describes what I'm going to call the proposed scope of services, and that covers, for example, services related to disabled children, which I'll come back to in a minute. But what I would say is that there's a further stage yet to be gone through, which is the development and signing of what's called the service delivery contract, which will actually confirm, amongst a whole range of other things, the scope of services. So that will be agreed between the people responsible for running the trust, and in the first place the County Council, and then latterly, because obviously within a relatively short space of time, the commissioning responsibilities will transfer to the two unitaries. And so in due course, that service delivery contract will be novated and then become, as it were, two service delivery contracts. So, and what happens in children's services is wherever you draw the line in terms of who's responsible for what, there are some children and families for whom there still will be potential for uncertainty about responsibilities. So if I could just use the example of disabled children, as it stands at the moment, the proposal is that the social care disabled children's services, which is currently in the kind of children's service as run by the County Council, those services will transfer to the trust. But of course, many of those children are also children who will be defined as having special educational needs, or may be defined as having continuing healthcare needs. It'll continue to be the case. So the plan as it stands at the moment is for SEND services to transfer, to remain within the County Council and then obviously become part of the arrangements that the two unitaries put in place. So you are right, and then you also gave the example of children who perhaps for whom there's concerns about their off-roll or they're out of school, and perhaps receiving services from the pupil referral unit. Those children, in most cases, will continue to be dependent upon services provided by the county council and thereafter by the two unitary authorities. But it is the case that they, of course, may well have other vulnerabilities that will require support and intervention from the Children's Trust. So that, in a microcosm, is an example of what I was talking about in my introduction, which is that to make sure that support is effective for those children, the Trust will have to work very closely with services that continue to be delivered by the County Council and thereafter by the two unitary authorities. If I can move on then to answer the second question, which is about how do we ensure that we get the right, if I've kind of understood it right, if we get the right kind of leadership in place to ensure that we've learned some of the lessons of the past. Because whatever arrangements you have for organisational arrangements you have for children's services, or indeed any adult social care or other services, good services are critically dependent upon the right leadership and management, irrespective of organisational arrangements. So you're absolutely right to have an expectation that the Trust will set out to recruit the very best it possibly can by way of its leadership and management of the children's services. I have to say, we'll build on what is already in place in the County Council. So what I've said in my letter to the Secretary of State is that changes were made relatively recently, just when I arrived as the Commissioner in management of the children's services, and new people were put in place with new responsibilities. And I have to say, Claire and I have been very impressed by the grip that they've got now on children's services. So, for example, an obvious example of that success, going back to the point I made about unallocated cases, was that was gripped very rapidly by the new leadership, and the problem was, frankly, just dealt with and overcome in a way which it hadn't been for months in the lead-up before that. And so, our aim will obviously to kind of keep that leadership in place and, encourage and support them to kind of carry on doing what they're doing. But bringing in addition, a senior leader in the form of a chief executive. We're out at the moment. It's difficult recruiting senior leaders in this area of work, but we're out at the moment trawling the field. We're using the combined knowledge and kind of experience of Claire and I bring, and other people like the chief executive of the council, because between us we have a lot of contacts in this field. And so we're absolutely clear that we do not want to make an appointment where we think there's kind of the kind of wrong kind of compromises being made, and if need be, we'll bring in an interim person as to kind of fulfil that role to make sure we have enough time to recruit the right kind of leaders. You asked a question about, and so what will we be paying these people, if I've understood that right? My view is that the salaries of those leaders need to be aligned with the kind of salaries that are being paid to kind of the other senior staff in council services in the area. And obviously I know that, there are going to be changes being made, new appointments being made by the unitary authorities in the kind of shadow form arrangements. It'll be important that whatever we do in the Trust, there is alignment with those kind of expectations and arrangements. You've got to pay the right kind of money to attract the right kind of talent, but you equally don't want to kind of set up a position where somebody has a kind of particularly kind of inflated salary, because that, in a sense, brings all sorts of questions and challenges and accountabilities. And that will take me on to the kind of question about stability. You're absolutely right to kind of put your finger on this. This has been one of the issues for us in Northamptonshire, for you in Northamptonshire. It's commonly the issue, one of the kind of issues that lies behind any service, any children's service that has got into difficulty. It's commonly one of the problems is you find a very high turnover of senior leadership instability. And you cannot possibly really kind of construct a kind of safe, confident, secure service which is reliant upon a kind of high turnover of interim leaders. We, as in putting in place the trust arrangements, will be looking to that as one of the things that we want to kind of secure going forward into the future. We've got to get the right people in place that will be committed to the work in Northamptonshire for the kind of length of time it takes to kind of turn around services. Because these services don't get turned around in a year, they don't get turned around in 2 years. It's a medium to long-term proposition. You look for progress in year one, you look for progress in year two on what you've achieved in year one, but you're still not you won't be confident that that is embedded and secured at that point. So you need kind of people who are going to be able to commit longer term. You asked a question about the governance arrangements and used the example of Doncaster. As I understand it, so Doncaster, the initial model that was put in place for Doncaster was a different model to the one that we are proposing for Northamptonshire. And my understanding is that now what is happening in Doncaster is they are moving towards the model that is proposed for Northamptonshire. In other words, a model that is, in technical terms, described as a wholly owned company, wholly owned by the local authority or local authorities in this case. And indeed, that is the model that I'm familiar with, where I'm chair of the trust in Birmingham. And it'll be a model that actually you probably got experience of in other ways, from kind of previous experience in Northamptonshire. Most local authorities actually run a whole range of services, districts and counties and unitaries as well, often have quite a range of services that are delivered in this kind of way. So the organisation remains in the ownership of the council or councils, and the council or councils have certain particular rights set out in what's called reserved matters, and those councils will expect every year that the wholly owned company, in this case the Children's Trust, will produce a business plan which sets out what it plans to do, how it plans to do it, what funding that's going to be required, and that business plan, and indeed then the kind of contract, the sum that's agreed, is something that will be negotiated and has to be agreed by the owning councils. You asked the question about, you used the example of Sandwell, where Sandwell is in the position this year, as we understand it, of returning to the council and saying it needs some additional investment. And you asked the question about how can we avoid that kind of difficulty in the set-up arrangements in Northamptonshire. Well, the first point I'd make is that it is very common across the country at the moment for local authorities, and most of them are still directly managed services, for there being quite difficult discussions about the kind of funding position of children's services. Children's services, I think, have been identified by the Local Government Association as probably the major kind of funding issue that faces local government at the moment. It doesn't mean to say that issues relating to adult social care haven't gone away, and some members here today will have heard a very interesting presentation about the kind of challenges, I think it was yesterday or the day before, about challenges you face, particularly in Northamptonshire, and like any local authority. So it is a fact that local authorities, by and large, are facing huge challenges in terms of funding of children's services. So I couldn't stand here and say there won't be a kind of position whereby the Trust needs to have some kind of form of renegotiation going forward into the future. However, the lesson to be learned from the setup of other trusts is that it's critically important to get the first service delivery contract with the budget sum properly in place, where all parties are confident that this is a reasonably funded kind of position. Now, the details of that have yet to be kind of finalised for Northamptonshire, but thus far, what I've seen in the discussions I've had with officers in the council suggests that we're pretty close to a kind of strong position in terms of the kind of budget that needs to be set for children's services. There are pressures. You're going to be hearing about them later on today. There's an overspend in year. Going forward, I would expect the County Council and the unitaries to be looking for the trust to begin over a period of time, and it won't happen straight away, because just as I've said, that the turnaround in terms of performance will take some time, turnaround in terms of financial management and the cost of services will take some time as well. But I think it's, when you look at the kind of profile of spend as it stands at the moment, the fact of the matter is that in Northamptonshire, a very significant proportion of spend is going at the moment on placement costs. Now that is always the case, but I think going forward, it's a bit of a bold assumption, but having looked at that, the kind of detail of some of that, I think going forward there are opportunities for, in time, for a kind of re-engineering and a change of the kind of shape of the kind of profile of spend. It won't be easy to achieve, but I think it'll be the kind of conversations that the unitaries begin to have going forward into the future. There's a question about what are the lessons to be learned from the trusts that, I think your language was failed in your written question. I will kind of say that actually no trust has actually failed and defined. Some trusts, only a couple, have not made as enough progress in terms of service improvement that they should have done. And some trusts are facing financial challenges, as I've said already at the moment. So the lessons to be learned from that are the kind of things, the points and comments I've already made, which are about getting the initial setup right. We've learned a lot from what's happened in kind of trusts up and down the country about what you should be looking for in those arrangements and getting the right kind of leadership and management. And then the third thing, which is a lesson I've really learned, is getting the relationship right with the owning local authorities. Sometimes trusts have got into difficulty because they did not prioritise that. I'm making it crystal clear to everybody in Northamptonshire that, and the incoming potential leadership, that is something that you neglect at your peril. You've got to have a really close, trusting relationship with your owners in order that you can have some of those kind of very difficult conversations going forward in the future. Do you want to say a little bit, Claire, in kind of a response to some of the kind of last...
The question about where staff will... Shall I stand near the mic?
Yes.
Where staff will be located and concerns about that. Although the Trust will have a centralised HQ where finance, HR and so on are involved, there shouldn't be any reason why the social workers who are currently based in the localities and the districts will be moving. In fact, we're in discussion. The current senior leadership team is involved in the service design, as is the Chief Executive. And I myself have visited all the offices around where social workers are based in Northamptonshire. And it seems perfectly obvious that you don't want to pay money for social workers to be driving backwards and forwards from one central base, and that the locality model and the connections that they have with the local community and local agencies should be built upon and probably enhanced, I think. We're thinking of assessment services. So I think in one of the written questions there was why should there be a centralised HQ? That will be for the kind of backroom administrative and management responsibilities.
Have we covered most of the questions, Chair? And I appreciate that we've kind of, there's a time limit.
Yes, no, it's been some very full answers. Thank you for that. Councillor Clark, you'd asked a question. Had that been covered? Did you want to say any more to it?
Well, very briefly, Mr. Chairman, I don't want to delay us unduly, but my concerns are about whether the elected councillors of this council and future councils will be able to trust the trust to deliver on the priorities set down by the elected councillors. This is an arm's-length body. It will rely on a certain cooperation and dynamic tension between the elected councillors, the heads of services here, and whoever is the managing director and chairman of the trust. For example, in budget setting, who has the responsibility, or will have the responsibility for setting the budget of the trust? Will that be the responsibility of the individual councils, which is then given to the trust, or is it a bid made by the trust, handed down to the councils? Will that bid then be subject to scrutiny by the scrutiny committees, as the present budgets are, where we can take direct action? And in the event of a disagreement between, let's say, the powers that be, the political elected representatives, and the cabinets of the two councils, and the heads of the trust, who would be responsible for resolving them?
The position quite clearly set out in law is that it is the councils that remain the ultimate accountable body, and it is the councils that ultimately make the decision about the setting of the budget. So, whilst the services remain in intervention, and there is the Secretary of State, you know, there's the Secretary of State has an involvement, then the Secretary of State, of course, has a kind of, you know, the government has a role to play to oversee, to ensure that the kind of right kind of discussions are taking place. But there's no getting away from it. Then the ultimate analysis and going forward into the future, it is the councils that will make the kind of final decision in the budget setting, and it's therefore beholden upon the kind of trust to enter into the kind of discussions and negotiations that need to take place with the council and the councils. And also, it would be my expectation, and it's my experience elsewhere, that the trust remains accountable to the kind of entire democratic process. So I would anticipate that the chair and the chief executive would expect to appear before the scrutiny committees of certainly of the county council and then of the two unitaries going forward in the future. Of course, part of the kind of scrutiny will be about challenge around about performance, but part of the scrutiny will also be challenge around about the kind of financial management and about the kind of requirements set out and going forward into the future. Does that? It's of course, it's never a straightforward process, but you've got the best possible chance of achieving a kind of successful and harmonious relationship, which is what you absolutely want to get to. If the council and then the councils feel completely confident that the trust is being open and transparent about the way it's carrying out its business, is able to demonstrate that it's doing that business in a kind of reliable and consistent and efficient manner. I'll give you a little for instance. So, for example, I'll just kind of give you a parallel. So where I am the chair of the trust, we are currently at the moment in just those kind of discussions for the budget to be set next year. And one of the things that Trust has agreed to do is to bring in some external scrutiny from CIPFA around about the kind of financial management and processes. And that's the kind of example, I'm just using it as an example, of how the Trust and the Council have agreed a way forward to where they can both feel comfortable that the right kind of actions are being taken, the right kind of approach is being adopted, and sometimes a third party helps you get a kind of insight into all of that. Does that make sense?
Thank you very much. Thank you. Councillor Hakewell, you'd asked a question in advance.
Thank you, Chairman. I called a group meeting with myself, attended it throughout, as did the Labour Party, and delegated myself to ask 3 questions. The first question: what is the nearest county in size, rurality, population and dispersed urban centres that has successfully implemented a children's trust? That's number 1. Lovely. Number 2, what is the track record of existing trusts in the model proposed for Northamptonshire in meeting annually set targets?
As I've already said, lessons that have been learned from trusts up and down the country. I would say that in some cases there have been challenges and issues around about the kind of delivery of the services on target. The example of Sandwell has already been quoted. I think we all will be aware that there are issues in Slough. The way you go about obviating the risk that might happen in this case is through the kind of arrangements I've just been describing.
And the third question: what is the track record of similar established trusts in reducing the occurrence of serious case reviews? And just before you answer that question, I do feel very confident, having listened to you on the presentation, I think it was Monday, of the way in which this is going forward and the professionalism which you're bringing to it. So I'll report that back to myself.
Question about serious case reviews. It's such a small sample size. No local authority, it's very rare for a local authority to have more than 2 or 3 serious case reviews in any one year. So it's impossible, you know, you can often go a couple of years without a serious case review, or you might have 2 or 3 in a year, and it's impossible, therefore, I think, to compare. By serious case review, I assume you're really saying, will there be a reduction in child deaths or children receiving serious injuries, because the two are different things. And firstly, to say, that's the bit really about the sample size. It's a very difficult thing to judge, and often those children might not even be known to services. In terms of serious case reviews, it's actually a good thing to have a serious case review. It's an opportunity to learn. It's a very forensic and in-depth look at how services across the piece function together, not just children's services. So you would want to encourage serious case reviews where there had been a child death, certainly, or serious injury, to an extent that you have the capacity to deal with it. I worked in an authority recently where they had 13 serious case reviews on the go, and that was because they lowered the threshold and wanted to do a lot of self-examination, and I think that was too many in terms of capacity to do them properly. But you would expect any local authority or any trust to be having those opportunities to look at what went wrong when something went very wrong. So,
Sorry, Chairman, just to come back on that last one. So, effectively, no difference in that last question between the establishment of a trust and its structure and its governance, or an internal, as you might say it, local authority. What I think you said was there's no difference. And
no, both are completely answerable to the National Safeguarding Panel and to their local safeguarding partnerships.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Councillor Hakewell. I've got a couple of people who like to ask questions, which I'll allow before we finish this item. Councillor Mercer.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. All the questions and comments so far have been of a strategic nature, and I personally have concerns in that area, but something that hasn't been raised is the constituency role of councillors. I would be interested to know if you can give us some indication of what channels will be available to councillors in this and the future unitaries to pursue inquiries and requests from constituents who have had problems or issues with children's services, please.
This is, well, it's a very good question. So this is absolutely something I would expect the Trust to agree and approach with in the first place with the County Council, and then subsequently with the 2 unitaries. Because it is my experience that quite often the kind of issues that arise as through constituency work can, in fact, cover a sort of spectrum of kind of services and kind of service questions and issues. And therefore what you'd want is any kind of elected member to be able to get a kind of reply which wasn't too, as it were, kind of narrow in its focus, if that's what they needed to be able to give to their constituent. So my first point would be it must be a process that is agreed with the kind of owning local authorities. But the second point to make is I absolutely would expect the Trust to be willing to provide answers to questions raised through a constituency business, but it would always do so through the owning local authorities, if that makes sense.
Thank you very much.
If I may just add to that as well, just to give extra reassurance to members, within the draft service delivery contract, which we're currently working on, we have in there around a complaints process. So for me, complaints are usually a good temperature test of how things are working and performing. So within that contract, we will have an arrangement where if complaints come into the Trust, the Council, initially the County Council and then ultimately the 2 unitary councils, would be cited on those complaints within, some of them within a 24-hour period. So that is to make sure that the sovereign bodies that are still accountable are cited on the processes of complaints and making sure we're testing the temperature of what's happening within the delivery body, which is the Trust.
Thank you very much. Councillor McGee.
Thank you, Chair. Like many other councillors, I got involved in politics to support, advocate and help local families in our areas. And one of the most important things, whether I agree with a trust, a private company or not, is that it's successful and going along, it does what it's supposed to do. How do we, as councillors, ensure we are keeping an eye on that? Because I believe moving forward is essential and it's set up in the right way. I believe this should be looked at in depth, at scrutiny on every agenda going forward for the next year. Does the Commissioner agree with that?
I think that's a matter, the absolute kind of, the kind of local approach in terms of the kind of what I could call the governance arrangement, governance oversight, is absolutely a matter for the kind of local authority to kind of make its mind up. What I would say, just going forward in general, the general principles would be that the trust, what I would expect, and indeed as the Commissioner I'll be looking for, is that initially the County Council and then the two unitaries put in place the right kind of what I will call commissioning arrangements, which are the arrangements by means of which the council and councils hold the trust regularly to account. So I would expect that probably to operate on two levels, something like there being probably a monthly kind of report and accountability kind of arrangements, which are probably going to be on the council side to be the responsibility of officers, and then probably a quarterly kind of process which will involve both senior officers and the key elected members. I think what the council then chooses to do in terms of within its kind of democratic process is a matter for the council, but what I would say is I would expect the trust going forward to be make itself available, put at the disposal, as it were, of the kind of democratic process initially in the County Council and thereafter in the two unitaries.
Thank you.
Chairman, if I may as well just add to that, the meeting that Commissioner refers to as a quarterly meeting, I've recommended in the first year of the Trust would be a monthly meeting where members would have involvement in that governance process. In light of the challenges that the Trust will have and also the complexity of moving to unitary at the same time, I think it would be wise to have those monthly rather than quarterly in the first instance.
Great, thank you very much. And thank you, Commissioners, for coming this morning and giving us such a full report on their activities and also answering the questions that were put so succinctly. Yes, thank you very much for coming. Thank you. Thank you. Before we move on to the budget, you should have on your seats the sort of explanation of what we're going to do for the rest of the meeting as we discuss the budget. I've also been asked to read out the salient points of it, which I will briefly do as well. The administration will move the budget as recommended by Cabinet. We'll then have the budget seconded. I will then ask the Labour group to make a statement on the budget, and I will then ask the Liberal Democratic group to make a statement and present their amendment on the budget. That will be seconded, and then I will ask councillors to debate the amendments, after which the Liberal Democrat group will have the right to reply. The mover of the original motion also has the right to reply, and then after all that I will then ask the Council to vote on the amendment, and this will be, as I said before, a recorded vote. I will then return to the substantive motion, which is the administration's budget, which may or may not have been amended, and then we will debate that. At the end of the debate, the proposer of the administration's budget will have the right to reply before I call for another recorded vote on the budget. If none of that is clear, then you've got the opportunity to read it on the handout that's on your seat. But there is no opportunity to ask for questions or anything. So we now come to item 7, the final revenue budget report, and I'd like to invite Councillor Longley to move the budget. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Chair. That was very clear. Well, good morning, everybody. It seems moments ago that I stood up here last time. The year's just flown by. Don't know where it's gone. It's gone. And this morning, I'm not going to drone on for half an hour or 40 minutes on a lot of numbers and bore you all senseless, because I recognise that the majority of you aren't particularly necessarily financially orientated. You're interested, but you're not into the depths of it. And I think you've got many interests. I mean, good example this morning, many interests, children and education. And what you really want to know is what's the general state of the finances. Can you be confident to pursue those various interests, confident that the finances are there in the best state they can be. So that's what I'm going to try and put you in the picture on that today. And the way I'm going to do this is that I'm going to run across the best way to understand numbers, in my experience, has been to run across a series of years. If you go to the bank manager and you want to sort of borrow something for your business, the first thing he'll ask you for is 3-year sets of figures. First thing, at least. If you want to sell a business, you'll be asked for 3-year sets of figures. If you want to buy a business, that's the first thing you'll want to look at. So, therefore, to understand the figures that we've got here today, then I'm going to run across a number of years. So you get hopefully you'll go away with a proper feel of where we are, as well as the specifics as well. So, start of the story, chapter 1, is of course 2017-2018 results. 41.5 million overspend, borrowings at 603 million, and reserves at virtually zero, 3.2 as I understand it. We've had a 114 notice issued on us, and commissioners are appointed. And at that point in time, a new finance man's required, portfolio holder. And I've got to ask you now, who would be naive or daft enough to take that job? Well, I can tell you it was Mike Clark. Anyway, Mike stepped up to the occupy, brave as can be, and anyway, got stuck into the job and kicked it off, I think, as well as anybody is likely to ever do. Well done, Mike. Well done. And all of you will now be pleased to know that the accounts were signed off in November 2019. That's quite a bit down the line. And also, there will be no public interest report. That was reported a week or so ago. I was pleased to Barry inform me. So 2017-18 is very firmly behind us. That chapter's gone. So we move on to chapter 2, which is 2018-19, i.e. last financial year. It's very unfortunate. Mike, under doctor's orders, had to stand down. Very sad to see that. And we were all in a sort of a cabinet meeting when Mike made this quite emotional announcement at the time. And everybody looked round, because I've been helping Mike in the background here. Everybody looked round and I got the job. That's how it happened. The first thing that happened, pretty much, is I attended my first press conference. I'd never done that before, never been to a press conference, ever. And sat there, and bear in mind the time that was there, and all the cameras were there, the whole place was packed, and we were all sat there. And it was Sam Reid who asked the question. He said, what did you feel about 2 commissioners being parachuted in? What's your view on that? And the answer that he gave was, it's a team game. And that's going to be the theme of this today. It's a team game then, and it's been a team game ever since. And the team is 2 experienced commissioners. They're not here today? No? No? Representative? Oh, there he is. Hello. Yeah. Very experienced commissioners. Been very supportive. I haven't heard a crossword or a thump table once. It's been very, very, very professionally done. And then we got a new CEO, determined, resourceful, and a can-do attitude if ever you've seen one. bit of blarney from time to time, but that's the Irish charm that we all come to love and admire. So there we are, rearrangement of staff, revamped cabinet, lots of changes, lots of changes. And during that year, lots of ups and downs, you'd expect. It was a bit of a scramble. Plan followed plan. Some failed. There was that very well-known one of the 8 million that we wanted to get, and that we couldn't get that. So we had to go again. We had a problem with the pension, 2 million, as you may understand. That didn't happen. So we had to reappraise and go again, and again, and again. And that was the point, determination to do it. A bit of a scramble. And at that point of the year, we then carried on, and then we came to this particular point of the year when I had to give a budget. And so far what I had to offer was the 17-18 results and a view of what the year end would be 18-9, 2018, 2019. And you may or may not recall this, but I gave the information to the press then that I was greatly encouraged. That's the best I could come up with. So, during that year, a lot of issues were knocked on the head, one by one, a bit of a scramble. A number of one-off fixes were included in that year end, which of course is not a good thing. But the key thing to that year was the setting up the productivity programs. You may recall I mentioned it at the budget, and that was the key. It was the underlying work that was done during that year. And those that you were present will remember me alluding to it. And it was our main driver to reducing the cost base. Now, productivity can be quite slow when you put it, because you've got the issue of year-end effects, whole year effects. Now, what I mean by that is if you put a program in that saves money halfway through the year, clearly you're only going to get half the year effect during that year. But the following year, you get the full year effect. So it's a matter of keep doing this, keep doing this, keep doing this. And of course, now, the following year, you see the impact of that. But that year was, I would say, was the year. That was the tough year. The direction was set, and I think the tough work was really done then. And the results, well, we had a revenue of underspend of 4.5, borrowings were down to 580, and reserves were up to 37.5, but that included the 20 million, you may recall, that we were allowed to use from capital receipts. So we had 1 year where we'd stopped the overspend, borrowings were down a little bit, and reserves were up a little bit. And of course we then had a Children's Ofsted report. So move to Chapter 3, that's the current financial year we're in. And of course by now, we're beginning to see the benefits of a full year effect of these productivity matters put in. Productivity continues to be put in. We've got a very good team in there now doing that. And the key for the capital, in each case, we've got a capital spend this year. We've underspent it by quite a margin. Now, that's not necessarily a good thing, because we should be having more productivity, more and more and more. And I've said to cabinet members, the better projects you can come up, capital, have an impact on the bottom line. You may recall I spelled out the rules last time. And the rules are that you can spend as much capital you like if it's got a productivity matter, a productivity impact on the revenue line. Second one, you can use capital release from capital asset sales and reinvest it. That's okay. Where old assets costing too much to maintain, need a replacement, you can spend capital on that. It's really a productivity issue. But no vanity projects. None at all. Can't do them. Now, the major events in Chapter 3 this year was the biggest single factor was, of course, the 114 notice was lifted. Major event. No impact on the operational level, but what an impact on the morale and what a statement of confidence. Major, major point. During that year, our one officer, Ian Duncan, moved on, decided to move on, because he didn't want to stay for the full term. Barry here moves in. Now, a lot of you won't have noticed this, because Ian and Barry, they look very much alike, about the same height, they have the same haircut, They speak with a northeastern accent, difficult to understand at times. But the one thing, above all, they've got in common, and they're both very, very good accountants, very, very good financial directors. Very, very good. Now, I can tell you now that period 9 of this financial year has come out as showing a £29,000 underspend. Well, that's pretty much break even, really. It's almost in the rounding error, this sort of place. But I can tell you now, period 10 will show an improvement on that. And so we're looking towards quite a reasonable year end at the moment. I'm not going to make anything more than that, but that's where it is. Now, but you've always got to bear in mind in this game, I've been querying my colleagues this morning. There's whoever's heard of Yogi Berra. Yogi Berra. Aha, yes, we have. Now, for those who spend a lot of time in the States, you'll know that Yogi Berra was a very well-known baseball player. Very well. He's died now, unfortunately, a few years ago. And he was very famous for a saying. And what happened was he was in a major event was taking place, and his team was losing quite badly. And they asked Yogi, it's a proper name, it's a real bloke. They asked Yogi, well, what's going on? What do you think, Yogi? And he said, the game ain't over till it's over. And that's been quite a clear phrase. So we're within 6 weeks at the end of the year. It's looking good, but the game ain't over till it's over. So I'm still cautious here. But it's looking okay at the moment. If it goes wrong now, I'd be very, very surprised. That's this year. Now, I think that we'll move on to there. So that's what else has happened of significance this year. I think that the highlights have been. I think probably one of the things is that we look very much like we're going to end up in positive territory. We've reduced the LOBO loans. LOBO loans were 150 million and now to 110. I think I've explained what LOBO loans were before, but for those that don't know, I'll just touch on them. They're very similar to credit card loans in many ways, in that you borrow at a very low level, and providing you hit the strike date, i.e. the repayment date, then everything's good. If you don't, then the interest rate goes up, a bit like your credit card. If you borrow on your credit card, which everyone does, you pay it off at the end of the month, no cost extra. If you don't pay it off, interest rates go up. So LOBO loans you need to get rid of, and we've got rid of 40 million of them, and our expectation is to continue to dry those out at every possible opportunity. The other thing that's happened this year is that last year LGSS law lost £1.25 million. So we've had a little bit of a rearrangement there, to say the least. And this year, it looks like we're heading for just under £250,000 profit. So in other words, an example of knocking it on the head. Other thing that's happened, short-term borrowings, 106 million. Short-term borrowings is stuff you borrow over 1 year, typically, a bit less maybe. So you've got to pay them back on a continuing basis. And what we've done there, we've borrowed this, we've rearranged the majority of this over 40 to 50 year borrowing at 1.67%. That's pretty good, I think. And I think there'll be people 20, 30 years' time will be thanking us very much for that. There's been an agreement secured to repatriate LGSS, and that'll be a factor in next year's. And I think those are really some of them, some of the highlights. But you can only do these sort of things when you've got the finances under control and as best you can. So there we are. So that's this current year. So we now move on to Chapter 4, which is, of course, the budget. Now, this is, I think, I believe it's a robust budget. I wouldn't be here if I didn't think it was. Many positives, not perfect. We did well with the government grants. That was good. Productivity programs, bear in mind we're entering the 3rd year, so we've got history now, and we carry on doing that, and we'll continue that through this year and into next year. The year-end outlook, we put in a balanced budget. We expect it to be so. And the borrowings, again, we expect to go down again. and we expect the reserves to go up and ending up at 42 million. As you all know, there's a 4% pay increase in there. I'm not going to bore you with fringes and things like that. That's quite a substantial amount of money. It's a big number, but that's in there, and it can do that because we believe we can afford it. Now, I'm going to bore you a bit with some numbers now for a couple of moments. And I'm going to talk about the gross spend in the various departments and the net spend. What I mean by that is the gross spend is the gross amount that is available in the budget, and then you have a revenue. Each department has a revenue from various sources, and you end up therefore with a net spend. So that's how that comes about. So in adults, we end up with with last year was a gross spend of 241. This year it's 253. A net spend of 167, and that's a 4.9% increase in net spend. Children's, 134, plays 143, and the net spend is a 9.3% increase, and that includes the overspend of this year. So I would look to the Commissioner and say, if he was still here, unfortunately he isn't really, and say that's an area we don't expect, because bear in mind that's something that we will lose control of on a day-to-day basis, so that's something we've got to keep a very clear eye on. And in place, gross spend 135, net spend 92.5, 2.4% increase, not so much. Corporate, now this is quite large, 110 gross spend, 58.5 net, and that's a 14% increase. A lot of that's to do with unitary. But the overall number you can take away with you is the gross spend is 642.3, and that compares to 617 last year, so that's a big increase. And the net spend is an increase of, net spend is 445, it's an increase of 6.7%. That's a very big number. That's a very big number. Bear in mind what inflation is today. Okay. Things we've got to do. We've got to reverse LGSS into NCC. And we've got shadow elections. We've got the Children's Trust. And we maintain the emphasis on productivity. So our belief is that we will end up with a situation that we will end up with a balanced budget this year. Now, bear in mind I talked about 3 years. Come back to that. The 3 years we had, 1 year is in the bag, 4.4 underspend. This current year is looking strong, looks okay, shouldn't go too far wrong between now and the end of the year. And next year is one of the most robust budgets I've seen. So therefore, what we should be going into unitary, and this is the message I want you to take away, is that we should be going in with 3 years balanced books, 3 years where the borrowings have gone down, and 3 years where the reserves have gone up. That will be our legacy when we hand over to the unitary. And I'd like very much to thank the team that's done that. The team that's done that has been support from the commissioners, I've spoken about already, the chief exec, without a doubt, driver there, and where are they? They're over there, some of the staff over there, the directors. And I'll go further than that. We've got a united cabinet. It's worked well. But I'd also like to thank some members here, Mick in particular, Chris over there, Julie, where are you? When I first got involved in this, I made a point of, on the Thursday before every cabinet meeting, invited themselves, or anybody else that wants to come for that matter, and we go through the numbers, and I try and tell them how it is. And they're very supportive. Usually Barry's there or James, and they've got access to the numbers, and I think it's worked quite well, I'd like to think, and I'm very, very thankful for your support in that situation. So, folks, that's me about done. Thank you very much for your attendance, listening, and I'd recommend this budget to you. Let's hope you vote for it.
Thank you very much for that. Could I ask Councillor Toy to second the budget, please?
Thank you, Chairman. I've no hesitation in supporting Councillor Longley's proposal. All councillors should have read the details contained in the paper, particularly those in Agenda Item 7. Councillor Longley has highlighted the proposals that contribute to our council's plan and the background leading up to this. I believe all councillors should be grateful for the time and commitment made by our Cabinet. Finance scrutiny, our officers particularly, and through their due diligence, and of course the staff that work for them, and taking account of the valuable responses from residents and external organisations during the consultation process. We know that the budget process is under continual review and challenge, particularly with the multifarious services we provide to all of our county's residents. We know that the budget process is budget's process will continue to be reviewed, as I've just said. It is, of course, become a more challenging time as we move towards creating two unitary authorities. I believe this budget has taken account of the impact it will have on all of our residents. It is so important that this is reflected in this year's budget. Although we have to look ahead to May 2021, there will be changes taking place in the meantime from this April. By 2021, there should be improved delivery of services by the County Council, also borough and district councils, over the next 12 months. One simple example is to the public face of NCC, County Council, based on the current state of the county's roads. There's 4.5 kilometres of roads in the county. It's amazing, isn't it? That's the purchase of the new pothole. Pardon? 4,500. Yeah, so did I miss that out? Sorry. It's down here. Sorry, I missed it. 4,500. 4.5k, yeah, okay. That's the purchase of the new pothole repair machines, which will increase these repairs from 10,000 to 48,000 per year. And of course, the progressive restructuring of our main and most expensive services to create more efficient and productive ones to meet increasing demands on them and make considerable savings along the way. I believe that the opposition parties will realise over the next 12 months and beyond that this proposal was the right thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next part is the budget statement from the Labour group, and could I invite Councillor Scrimshaw to make the statement? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. This is a historic day, and a sad one. After more than 130 years of existence, Northamptonshire County Council will today pass its last ever budget before it's abolished completely in just over a year's time. I can't help but wonder what some of our predecessors, whose portraits are looking down on us, might think of that. I suspect they wouldn't be impressed. Over the last few years, I've responded to a variety of budget proposals, proposed budgets, some of which were better than others, and in that time have put forward suggestions to bring in extra income that were described at the time as socialist claptrap. Although with hindsight, if they had been implemented, we might well be in a different position than we are today, which might have in itself perhaps led to a different route towards unitary. I've been accused of wasting the Council's time by presenting budget amendments that the administration were never going to pass. In those cases, I was said to have been party political, although of course it was just part of the democratic process and a way of publicly raising suggestions that could have been taken up later had there been a political will to do so. This year, however, is somewhat different. We genuinely are in unprecedented times, and the rule book needs to be thrown out of the window. Never before has this council had to plan for its own demise next year, and never before has it had the sort of financial restraints put upon it by both national and local decision makers that we have today. Never before have we gone into a budget setting meeting constrained by having government appointed commissioners with the power to take away decisions from elected councillors in the way that they will over the next 12 months. As an opposition, we welcome the fact that the commissioners have brought about the sort of robust financial position that the administration were never able previously to do, and arguably never could have done. But this financial robustness does come at a price. The commissioner's remit has been purely about finance and getting the council ready for unitaries in a year's time, and this budget today reflects that. The whole budget today is a reaction to the financial failings of this council, and its sole aim, and that's its sole aim. And while it tries to address the council's financial problems, it does not necessarily reflect the priorities of local residents, and indeed not necessarily reflect the views of elected members. Nor does it necessarily reflect the future problems local government will have in Northamptonshire. The budget plan is simply to get this council through its last ever year, ready for the new councils to take over, but it does still leave many important questions about that future unanswered. All of us know that the move to 2 brand new unitary councils, which is reflected almost in every line of this budget, and the setting up of a separate company to deal with the long-standing problems in children's services, is simply about a Conservative government removing the political embarrassment of a failing Conservative council. But clearly that move in itself will not solve some of the fundamental problems we have as a county, and will not by itself provide enough financial savings and efficiencies to address Northamptonshire's future funding problems. Until central government come up with a plan to address the national crisis in social care funding, every upper tier council in the country will have problems, and those problems will continue to be exasperated in Northamptonshire because of the political mismanagement and underperformance of those in charge of this council. That was recognised by the government's own inspector, who said the council's previous approach came across as sloppy and lacking in rigour. The Joint Committee for both the West and the North have recently received reports explaining that a £43 million investment across the county is required to bring about £86 million worth of annual savings. But these figures could easily be misunderstood because most of those savings are not simply about the process of moving to unitary and are included in today's budget. And on the assumptions that this council has about how services will change in the future. Those reports and the verbal responses from officers to questions about them have confirmed that those figures are already out of date and will continue to change. And as I've previously explained, are certainly not entirely based around improvements brought about by unitary alone. And this adds to future uncertainties, which also manifest themselves in this budget. And the Council's own auditors have already said there is a risk that the millions spent so far on unitary reorganisation may not actually be value for money. And it is those proposed unitary arrangement that shows up as a theme running entirely through this budget, with the uncertainties around them making it very difficult to comment on the detail of how this budget will survive during the next 12 months. For example, we see before us in the budget today some very clear and defined ambitions for children's services next year, both in terms of reinvestment as well as proposed savings. And while there are some genuine questions about whether these proposals will actually be achieved, some of which have been asked by the Council's cross-party scrutiny committee, who were concerned whether the proposed investment is sufficiently well considered, and about individual saving proposals. For example, again, with scrutiny saying that they were not confident that these savings in the building capacity in foster care proposal will actually be managed, as well as further concerns around the levels of risk around improved children's outcomes. There is, of course, a much bigger question about whether the new children's company, when it is established in July, or as we've heard today, possibly later, will even choose to carry on with those proposals, or attempt to do something entirely different, albeit possibly within the same financial envelope, depending on the contract price negotiations. Until that board is in place, everything is just speculation. We also know that local government reform for Northamptonshire will bring about some very challenging and as yet undecided implications for local taxpayers, with more and more costs being pushed onto residents, seemingly with the government's tacit approval as they try to distance themselves from local councils. This could include some very unfair measures, particularly around the local precepts needing support to support town and parish councils, especially in the future, as those unanswered questions around social care funding could very well mean pressures on local neighbourhood services currently being provided by the districts and boroughs. All of which further adds to the difficulty of commenting sensibly on this 2021 budget, as that budget does nothing to clarify the picture in the future, in the sort of medium or long-term future. One of the good things provided for in the Commissioner's budget, however, has to be the attempt to allow further investment into the county's individual service areas, a point that the portfolio holder was talking about a moment ago. And allowances have been made for assumptions and forecasting around inflation, future growth in demand, and of course the baselining figures which are needed to compensate for the Council's previous budgetary failings. In the two main service areas, children's and adults, those figures actually equate to far more than the individual saving proposals in this budget, highlighting perhaps more than ever the money needed for this council just to stand still. And it is for that reason, in some ways, those assumptions might prove to be even more important than the individual saving proposals included in the budget. All councillors on this council are used to saving proposals not being met. This year's budget, for example, is full of those, and that's not a new thing. But if the assumptions around growth are wrong, that could actually add far more pressure in year for the 2021 budget than any problems on savings being delivered. And it's worth noting that despite good intentions, this is an area where traditionally there have been problems in Northamptonshire, and consequently a recurring theme of this year's budget scrutiny process was we've heard it all before, and dare I say that was said with some justification. And while I mentioned scrutiny, can I also say how disappointed we are that the Council's leadership was unable to persuade the Commissioners not to change the planned cuts to road maintenance, including the sort of winter gritting element, which scrutiny strongly recommended should not proceed. But in conclusion, while the budget put together by the Commissioners goes a long way to deal with some of the important short-term problems of this individual council, it does still leave lots of questions unanswered as to the long-term position of local government for Northamptonshire. And by not having a crystal ball, it does not give us the long-term reassurances that we and our local residents need, although I think we all understand the imperatives behind it. And given the constraints that I referred to earlier, unfortunately, there is very little else that can be done in this final year, and I think most of us today understand that. It's just a shame that there isn't yet a clear, defined path to the future. Had we got here by another route, I have no doubt that there would have been more time to do things differently and a more thought out and defined manner than those ways being basically imposed upon us. We therefore will not be opposing this Commissioner-led budget. We recognised its designed to move us to unitary, and because of the government's desires and timescales around that, there is very little choice. But nor will we support it. The responsibility of doing that lies entirely with the administration councillors, because, quite frankly, the only reason we have this particular budget today is a direct result of their party's actions over the last few years. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Our next budget statement and amendment is from the Liberal Democrat group. Amongst the papers on your chair should also be the amendment from the Liberal Democrats, if you've not already seen it. And can I ask Councillor Stanborough to come and present the amendment and statement? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman. Malcolm, you had me worried at the start there. Thought you were making my speech for a second or two. But you veered off script, so don't worry about it. I'll try and see if I can deliver it as I planned. So, yes, I've got an amendment to present to you, and I've also got some comments to make on the budget, but I'll return to that later. Just should say first, Councillor Scrimshaw said that he was disappointed that you weren't able to persuade the commissioners to rethink the proposals on road maintenance that are in the budget. Well, Councillor Scrimshaw, here's your chance. So, as Malcolm did, let me take you back to February 2018. And what was the backdrop to the February 2018 budget? And in no particular order of importance here, the Conservative group votes no confidence in the council leader. We had the Calla report. We had an advisory letter from the auditors. We had an LGA peer review. The leader resigned. And we had that Section 114 notice. I'm sure you all think the council is in a better position than it was in February 2018. Am I right? I knew I was. So what's the backdrop to the February 2019 budget? So, massive overspend to March 2018, confirmed by the auditors. A need to make huge savings, and another Section 114 notice. Likewise, I'm sure you all think, even if you're not joining in, that the council is in a better position than it was in February 2019. I'm sure you do. So, I'm here to propose the amendment to the budget before you. You've seen the amendment. It reinstates the proposed cut to winter gritting and reintroduces the Empowering Councillors scheme. The cuts to winter gritting in this budget aren't new. You've tried this before, in the February 2018 budget. Eventually you realised it was a bad idea. And shockingly, the cuts to winter gritting you're proposing this time round are more draconian than those you didn't like the last time. In early February 2019, the leader of the council said in the local press, when referring to his decision to reverse the cuts to winter gritting, there was a clear message coming through, and I have listened to that call. It is our job to listen. We don't always have the luxury to be able to do that. This is down to the fact that there has been a hell of a lot of hard work dealing with the massive budgetary challenge. He also said that the issue had been discussed at the Conservative group meeting, and there was support from his colleagues. He also said he'd run the matter by the Chief Executive, Theresa Grant, and the two commissioners overseeing the council. And you were right to reverse those cuts. What did the people say? Well, in early 2019, 3,271 people signed a petition calling on the council to reinstate road gritting in Northamptonshire. So that's what the leader said then, that's what the people said then. But what is being said now? Well, scrutiny said that it proposed that the Cabinet recognises that the Overview and Scrutiny Committee considers that the proposal, targeted delivery of road maintenance, should not proceed due to the risk that its impact will have unintended consequences that outweigh the benefit of the proposed saving. Now, for me, that's a polite way of saying, in the absence of gritting, ice will develop on the road. Cars will be driven on the icy road. Some drivers will lose control of their vehicles. There will be accidents. Those accidents will lead to injuries to people travelling in the cars involved in the accidents. Some of those injuries will be serious. The consultation on this budget said the proposal that had both the highest proportion of respondents that disagreed with it and also the highest number of respondents that disagreed with it was targeted delivery of road maintenance. You've already acknowledged that the council is in a better position than it was in February 2018 and February 2019. I felt the acknowledgement coming at me. So do we really need to save £300,000 to make this cut? The leader doesn't like cuts to gritting. The people don't like them. Scrutiny doesn't like them, and the consultation doesn't like them. And a year ago, you didn't like them. So I'm asking you to agree with me. Let's take the cuts to the gritting network out of the budget. Now, with regard to reinstatement of the Empowering Councillors scheme, my colleague Dennis Meredith will address that when he seconds this amendment very shortly. I'm hoping to catch the Chairman's eye later to say some other things. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Could I ask Councillor Meredith to second the motion, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very happy to second this motion, this amendment. Firstly, I just want to congratulate Councillor Stramber. I spoke to him in great detail and he asked me what I wanted to do, and I mentioned about the Councillors' empowerment money. And everybody knows in this chamber the respect that we show to Councillor Stramber because of his finance links. First, I just want to give you a little bit of insight into what happens with the Councillors' empowerment money and what I've done with my Councillors' empowerment money. Many of you know that I represent a very, very deprived area. One of the most deprived areas, I have to say, within Northamptonshire. That is a matter of fact. Some of the things that I've helped is I managed to give £2,000 to vulnerable children from one of the local schools so they could give their children an opportunity, the children that needed special needs, to go to the Saints Rugby Football Club so they could have special training and get them interested in sport. And I felt great pleasure in giving that money, and the school contacted me and said without my help these children wouldn't be having this thing. Other areas of what has happened, I've also helped food banks to be able to run their process. Loads of issues, loads of organisations that wouldn't have normally got this money that I have helped. When I first become involved with the County Council, I had great pleasure that I had £7,000 to spend, and I felt really, really proud that I was a councillor, that I could go out and help the people within the community that needed help. Unfortunately, that money has now dried up, and I get lots and lots of emails from organisations asking me to help them, and I can't do it, except I can help them with £100 here, £100 there, because I get some money from the Borough Council. And indeed, your colleagues over the road have recently put in £2,000 into their budget to help vulnerable people, which is a good thing. But I do feel very, very sad that that money is now not available. I have also been spoken by quite a few Conservative councillors to say how good the Councillors' empowerment money was and how they could help their community. And some of the things that they done, they were telling me lots and lots of things they've done to help vulnerable people within their communities, and that was really, really great. And I've always said I will give credit where credit is due. It doesn't matter whether they're Labour or Conservative, if they go that extra mile by helping people that need that extra money, I will always congratulate them and I will always support them. I hope that you really will rethink, because Councillor Stramber has told you where the money can come from. So it's not impossible. So I do say to you, don't reject this, because people out there who are vulnerable, who need this money, are begging for this money to be put into their coppers so they can run services. So with one saying that, Chairman, I will wind down, and I'll just give you a final plea.
Councillor Meredith, I've given you 4 minutes.
Thank you. I'll stop. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you. We come to the stage of councillors speaking. I've got Councillor Hakewell.
Thank you, Chairman, for allowing me to speak on this particular item. The first thing I'd like to do, and this is generally on the budget, is to commend the officer team who have worked tirelessly in the light of political direction to bring this budget to us. They really have worked very hard, and I'd also like to commend all those frontline staff who are out there trying to do their job with austerity-driven reductions in resources, staffing, made available to them to do the job that is their vocation. We as members are here through political or other streams to want to make a difference in our county. Our professional teams took the other route, the professional route going through. So absolutely no doubt about that. Councillor Stamborough makes a very good and valid point about the U-turn. It seems that there used to be a lady who wasn't for U-turning, but in this circumstance it's more or less a roundabout that we have within the Conservative administration. I spoke with a number of props back in October before those cuts were made, was not listened to, which is not unusual at all, although I seem to get more attention now than I did when I was in that group. But basically saying, I always like a bit of a laugh, it's good humour. Basically saying, and I use the example of Harrington, and there are hundreds of villages in this county. I use the example of Harrington because it has a bed and breakfast, it has a gin distillery, it also has a very popular public house. Residents in Harrington, like every other village in this county, come out and are police officers, health workers, and all sorts of other people who look after us. And the idea of cutting this amount of money out to do the government's follow my leader bidding in terms of cutting this budget back will do nothing for the economic and well-being affairs of our colleagues in our villages and indeed our towns, let alone the children that will want to go to Montsai and other secondary schools in that way. Many rural communities will suffer by this cut. It's absolutely penal in the way that it's coming forward. We've seen that it was tried before and it was wrong, and hypocritically those who said it was wrong are now saying that it was right. It's time that I think the Conservative administration should stand up, not be follow my leader, but say we're doing things for this county, the people who live around us, and we will put services in that are suitable. And whatever happens in the future, so be it. I also agree with the ward initiatives, the empowerment funding as well. A great way to say, for the image of the county, these are the sort of things we can do for you. So I will support the amendment.
Thank you very much. Councillor Brown.
Just to check, first of all, Mr Chairman, are we debating solely the amendment, or so we'll return to the budget? In that case, I'll wait.
No, that comes next, yeah. Oh, that was the question, was it? Okay. Councillor Golby.
It doesn't matter. Thank you, Mr Chairman. Just speaking on the amendment briefly, I just want to make it clear we listened very carefully to scrutiny, and we've had conversations about the proposals, and we've also had conversations with officers and the commissioners. What we are not going to do is make sure that anyone or anything is put at risk with anything around that winter maintenance proposal. Like I say, we have listened to scrutiny, and we've got assurance that we're going to have some sort of review after this winter to look at where we are with that particular line, to make sure that if there are any changes, they're mitigated as much as possible. So we won't be supporting the Liberal Democrats amendment. The whole point of what we're trying to do, and hopefully I'll get another chance at this in a minute, is that it's talking about the financial foundation for the new unitary. We want to put that in with a clean slate. We're looking at increasing the reserve levels, making sure we've got a decent and adequate contingency in there, and this line, this proposal takes money away from that contingency, and frankly that is not the right thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I mean, the amendment, as we can see, is in two parts. The first part looks at taking 300k from the budget contingency in order to pay for precautionary gritting. And we've heard from the proposer and from 2 other councillors about that. We've also heard from Scrutiny in the reports that they came before us at the last Cabinet meeting. And from a Labour point of view, we would support the issue of not cutting the gritting in the fashion proposed within the budget. But the second part, which takes another 300k from the budget contingency, is to reinstate the Empowerment Councillors and Community Scheme. And while I would dearly love to see that come to fruition again, for a lot of the reasons that Councillor Meredith outlined, we've all, I think, experienced that fund and experienced the good it can do within our communities. But hand on heart, how can you put money into that in the position we're in as a council currently and moving forward into unitaries? I don't think we can. And therefore, sadly, we have to vote against this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mercer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if everybody understands what the word contingency means. For some people, it might be one of those strange technical terms that gets bounded around by financial experts and which hardly anybody understands. But what it means is taking care in case something goes wrong, putting some money aside in case something happens. Well, for instance, on the other side of the world, there is a new disease emerged, currently called COVID-19. It's killing about 2 or 3% of people it hits. It's shut down entire cities in China. Now, I don't expect anything like that to happen in this country. I think our resilience is far higher than that. However, I expect it to impose additional costs upon this council. Now, normally you would say, where does that money come from? It comes from the contingency fund. That's what it's there for. If anything, I feel that our contingency is a little bit on the light side, given the storm that's coming our way from the east. It's therefore totally unreasonable to take money out of the contingency fund and put it somewhere else when we're likely to need it and probably more. For that reason, I can't possibly support this amendment.
Thank you very much. Councillor Gough.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't intending to speak, but really, following on from what Councillor Mercer said, considering that the net budget is over nearly 450 million, the 2 million we've got as a contingency is a very low amount. And I think it's a bit concerning to see that people want to just take that money out of the contingency when, I mean, the last year we've seen the children's services over budget month on month. It is really concerning that we're not using that contingency as it should be as a side sort of pot of cash to be used if we need it. Yes, it'd be nice to have an empowering counselling fund again, but I think we can't afford to do that. We need to wait until the unitary is in place, and I think the unitary councils, once the new councillors were elected in May, if they want to make a decision with their budgets to have that kind of fund, they're welcome to do that. I know some of the borough councils obviously have their own community grant funding. In Wellingborough, I know we're proposing some. So obviously I'll point my constituency in that direction, but I think it is wrong for us to reduce this already quite small contingency fund. So I don't think, as I'm going to see the Labour group also supporting that we shouldn't be reducing that contingency as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Could I ask Councillor Stamborough to reply?
Thank you very much, Chair. Happy to reply to those comments. The silence from most members is almost deafening, of course. The message is clear. You're not going to vote for the amendment. That's fair enough. It's your choice. All I would ask is that in the coming weeks, heed your leaders' words. It's our job to listen. And maybe you can think about that. Just reply to the members that did speak. Councillor Hakewell, thanks for your support. Councillor Golby, good try, Councillor Scott, thank you for your partial support and the partial support of your group. I think it's a shame that Labour don't like the Empowering Councillor scheme. And Councillors Mercer and Gough, the £2 million that's in the budget is what's going into the contingency next financial year. That will be added to the £2.1 million that's already in the contingency. So even under the amendment, there will be £3.5 million in the contingency. And if we're really at the point as a council where a difference of £600,000 in our contingency is the difference between having a council that survives and one that crashes, then things are perhaps a bit more fragile in the finances than I thought. So I'll finish there, ask you to support the amendment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Councillor Longley, did you want to reply?
Thank you, Chair. Well, I think a lot of it has indeed. Am I replying to all three, or am I just the amendment?
The amendment.
Right,
yes,
on the amendment. Well, I think that that's fine. I think that Andy got it about right. That's what contingencies are for. And I think that Chris is chasing a rabbit that doesn't exist. I think it's probably fair to say, best way I can describe it. And what I mean by that is that the contingency is there. It will be there until it is needed. And if indeed gritting the roads is required and it becomes a high priority, then you have a contingency. What you don't do is just put it in there now, because that makes you a hostage to fortune. So that's what contingencies are all about. I thought Andy described that rather well. I'm going to come back on Jim here to say we're talking about cuts. We're not. There's, I don't know where you got that from, Jim, because there's not a reduction in resources. If you look at the gross figures, we're actually going to make available an additional 34.5 million, and that's an increase. That's not a cut, that's an increase. Okay? And if you look at the net, we're talking about an increase in net budget of 6.7%. Now, that's an increase in resources. Now, it may or may not be enough. That's an argument, different argument altogether. And you may want to distribute it differently. That's a different argument. But it's an increase. And there's no denying that. Numbers is numbers. I think that's probably about it, Chair. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you. Councillor Hakewell.
It's a point of personal clarification. Gritting is being cut, CUT, from 42% down to 37%. That was the cut.
Thank you for that. Can we now move on to the recorded vote, and we're voting on the amendment?
Councillor Richard Auger. Against. Councillor Fiona Baker. Against. Councillor Jane Birch. Abstain. Councillor Elizabeth Bowen.
Against.
Against. Councillor Wendy Brackenbury. Against. Councillor Rebecca Breeze. Against. Councillor Julie Brookfield is absent. Councillor Adam Brown. Against. Councillor Pinder Chown. Against. Councillor Robin Brown. Against. Councillor Michael Clark. Against. Councillor Julie Davenport. Against. Councillor De Capel-Brook is absent. Councillor Gareth Eales. Abstain. Councillor Scott Edwards. Against. Councillor John Eakins is absent. Councillor Matthew Golby. Against. Councillor Gonzalez de Savage is absent. Councillor Rob Goff. Against. Councillor Martin Griffiths. Against. Councillor Jim Hakewell. 4. Councillor Eileen Hales is absent. Councillor Mike Hallam is absent. Councillor Amy Howard is absent. Councillor Dudley Hughes is absent. Councillor Sylvia Hughes is absent. Councillor Cecile Irving-Swift. Against. Councillor Kilbride is absent. Councillor Graham Lawman. Against. Councillor Stephen Legg.
Against.
Against. Councillor Malcolm Longley. Against. Councillor Arthur McCutcheon. Abstain. Councillor John McGee. Abstain. Councillor Alan Matthews. Against. Councillor Andy Mercer. Against. Councillor Jill Mercer. Against. Councillor Dennis Meredith. 4. Councillor Ian Morris. Against. Councillor Sandra Naden Hawley. Against. Councillor Steve Osborne. Against. Councillor Bill Parker. Against. Councillor Suresh Patel. Against. Councillor Victoria Perry. Against. Councillor Anjona Roy. Abstain. Councillor Sam Rumans. Against.
Councillor Adil Sadigov is absent. Councillor Bob Scott. Abstain. Councillor Mick Scrimshaw. Abstain. Councillor Shepherd is absent. Councillor Smith-Haynes is absent. Councillor Smithers. Against. Councillor Chris Stamborough. For. Councillor Danielle Stone. Abstain. Councillor Winston Strachan is absent. Councillor Michael Tighe. Against. Councillor Alan Walker. Against. And Councillor Malcolm Waters. Thank you.
Does he want to speak to the main motion? Oh, screw it, yeah.
Put his hand up.
Yeah. 3 for, 32 against. Thank you very much. If I can just give you the results of the recorded votes. Thank you. There were 3 for, 32 against and 8 abstentions, so the motion is not carried. We come back now to the substantive motion, the main motion that we've been discussing, and I'd like to ask councillors if they want to speak to the main motion. Councillor Brown?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I'd like to commend Councillor Longley on his presentation of the budget. So, I remember full well last year Councillor McGee criticising him, I believe, for a lack of enthusiasm, a lack of passion, but he's left the room, actually. But if Councillor McGee wants fireworks, he'll have to wait for the likes of Councillor Gareth Eales, who at times does resemble a sort of oratorical Catherine Whale, but greatly entertaining all the same. Now, Councillor Scrimshaw almost gave the game away, I believe, when he praised what is now a robust financial position. And Councillor Longley equally alluded to that robust financial position. But following on from Councillor Longley's praise of everyone within the team who put together the budget, I was disappointed that it was left to one of our independent councillors to join in that praise of all of the hard-working staff within this council who have made the budget a reality. Councillor Scrimshaw, I thought, was slightly lacking in his praise of the staff who have worked so hard to put together the budget, choosing to praise solely the commissioners and alluding to his allegation that this was almost a two-man job in putting together a complex and challenging budget that we hope will deliver for the people of Northamptonshire. He says that it's a budget simply to get through the last year of our existence. Well, in a manner of speaking, it is. By definition, any budget is about the 12 months ahead. We have to wait for the medium-term financial plan to look beyond that. But of course, it would be irresponsible of us to not consider the full effects of the unitary status that is coming down the road. It is a monumental and historic step in Northamptonshire local government. And of course, we have to take full responsibility in being prepared for that new dawn here in our county. So, I did feel slightly sorry for Councillor Scrimshaw having to dance on the head of a pin and being forced to talk rather extensively about local government reform rather than about the budget. But I recognise that he's put in a massive amount of hard work through the Scrutiny Committee, and he was placed in a very difficult position when he approached the podium today in trying to score party political points when, in fact, we're faced with a very good and a very effective budget. A budget that gives us over £30 million of extra investment in Northamptonshire's public services, and a budget that, at long last, the Labour Party won't be voting against. I always enjoy listening to Councillor Stamborough, and I did rather enjoy his public participation, asking us whether we thought that we were truly in a better position. He almost didn't answer his own question until the very end, when there was a very tentative acknowledgement that, yes, 2 or 3 years down the line, we are in a better position. And actually, that's precisely because of Councillor Longley's team game, the team that have come together to work hard for the people of Northamptonshire, and because of the difficult decisions that have been taken all along the way. So, the hard work continues, but I'm full of praise for Councillor Longley, and I fully commend this budget, not just to this chamber, but to the people outside the chamber.
Thank you very much. Councillor McGee.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't really going to speak, but my comrade over there encouraged me. Chair, how can we not, do much about this budget? Because it's not done by this administration. The administration's budgets in the past have been an absolute failure. We know that. This budget is down to the commissioners, the chief exec, and our hard-working directors, senior staff. That's who this budget's down to. So don't try and kid yourselves that you lot did it. Your record financially is a disaster. That is why this council is dead. In 1 year's time, this council is dead. 130 years of history, and this council is dead because of your financial mismanagement. That's a fact. So we're going to abstain on this budget only because there's no other reason to do it, because the commissioners have had a hard drive with the chief executive and senior staff to make sure the unitaries are going to work and start off at a good pace. That's why we're here, to make this happen. Yous haven't done it. Yous have failed year after year after year. And some of the reasons you failed is because of political dogma. How many times has this group and the Lib Dems put suggestions forward that you could have took on board and helped? We've done it. That's just a fact. In fact, some of the things we've suggested were in the Calla report, but because of political dogma, you never took it on. So we might have helped save this county council, for the sake of our residents. So don't sit there and think you've had a great time. You haven't. I'll congratulate the commissioners, the senior staff and the chief execs, finance officers, etc., but not you lot. You have still failed this county by closing this county council into 2 unitaries, who will cost the people of Northamptonshire for the first 5 years or more a lot of money, because it takes a lot of money to set this up, when that money should have been spent on children's services, social care and the services that the people need. And that's a fact. But as for the budget, we'll abstain on this for the right reasons, because it's done for the right reasons, to give our 2 unitaries a chance, and that's the only reason we will sit in our hands on this budget. Because if we had an opportunity to use that contingency, we would put it in potholes, we would put it in gritting. Of course we would, because that's what it's needed in this county. Support our voluntary sector, our libraries, etc. That's what we would put that if we had the opportunity to spend the money that we should have had if you weren't so financially inept. And that's the truth. But our group will sit in our hands and we'll see and hope the unitaries have a good start.
Thank you very much. Councillor Meredith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I totally agree with what Councillor McGee has said. The Conservative administration has created a legacy of destroying this council. That is a fact. Over the years, the Liberal Democrats have put in alternative budgets, which would have saved this council a lot of distress. We have put in good amendments to the budgets, and we have asked for them amendments to go to scrutiny. And what has happened? They was never ever taken up. You stated that you are a listening council. That's not true. That is total fabrication, because you have not listened to the residents whatsoever. My amendment, which I put forward, that come from my residents, and you haven't listened. I fully want to congratulate all the officers, the chief executives, the commissioners who I did criticise and said that they should go back to London. But I listened to what they had to say, and I changed my mind. And I congratulated them on their hard work. I hope that will go into the minutes so that can be recorded. This budget is not the budget of the Conservative administration. Not at all. You can't crow about it and say this is a good budget, which we presented, because it's not your budget. As I say, and Councillor McGee has said, this is a budget from the officers and the commissioners. And I hope in the forthcoming elections, when we tell the people what has happened here this morning, that they will listen and they will give their decision of what they're going to do. And I hope their decision will be that a lot of the councillors here will not be sitting on the unitaries. Because if they are, they will just be taking the unitaries into the same way as what has happened over the years. I feel really, really, really sad that this county council is ceasing to not exist. The county council over the years have done brilliant work with the children's services, adult education, social services, you name it. They have done lots and lots of good things, and I have, as a councillor, have supported that as best as I can. But you...
3 minutes, Mr.
Okay, thank you,
Meredith.
Mr. Chairman. You have destroyed it. You have destroyed this council, and this is your legacy of this Conservative administration.
Thank you very much. Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, here we are, the last budget that Northamptonshire County Council will produce. And we all know why, don't we? It's all due to a successive Conservative administrations being unable to manage effectively, being dogmatic, over-optimistic, not challenging effectively, not listening to the opposition, which has resulted in money being drained away year after year. I too add my thanks to the commissioners and the staff who have had to work extremely hard this time, harder than ever before, because of everything that's going on. In fact, I wrote, along with other Labour leaders within the county, to ask for commissioners to come in, and I'm thankful they did. Turning to the budget before us, I have to say it's thanks to the commissioners that we have before us a more robust budget than I have previously seen in this chamber, and I've been in this chamber since 2007. There are, however, a number of areas that do concern us, despite that, and those areas were mainly spoken about by the first speaker we had today, the Commissioner on Children's Services. There are a number of uncertain risks there. Given our history, it's not surprising that the Children's Services is the most risky, as we've seen from the Children's Commissioner's briefing paper. It's good to hear that the team are focused on issuing issues highlighted by Ofsted with great energy, and that the team has an understanding of what the key issues are that need to be addressed. But it's a new team, inexperienced at working at senior levels in children's services, and therefore there are bound to be questions of risk, and that will possibly require more money. Another related is the Children's Trust, an organisation we desperately need to turn round, and it's good, we need it to be a good service. But it's another risk. From discussions I've had with people who have set up children's services, they're telling me there's no way that things will be in place by July this year. It normally takes 12 months to launch. I appreciate the hard work that's been done to prepare the appointment of the chair of the trust, but the other executive councillors have yet to be appointed, and it's they who will decide the trust business plan, and that's going to be a highly important document. What money they'll need to be true at is yet to be negotiated, and very little has been said about
3 minutes
that.
up, Councillor Scott.
So, lastly, I'd say that we seem to be following the Birmingham Children's Trust model. they had a loan of £10 million to set up. Are our coffers going to have to put the same sort of bill? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Stanborough.
Thank you very much, Chairman. As this is the final budget set by this council, it's an opportunity to assess the record of the Conservative administration. Our auditors have concluded that the council did not provide value for money 3 years in a row. The LGA peer review, Section 114 notices, 2 issued and a 3rd threatened. In February 2018, the Auditor's Advisory Notice says the budget proposed by the Conservative administration, if set, will be unlawful. Government sends in commissioners. The auditors say the council misappropriated funds ring-fenced for public health projects. Lost a judicial review of the library closure programme. Auditors confirm that the council's 2017-18 financial outturn is a huge deficit, the first time ever in local government. And a government minister confirms the intention to abolish Northamptonshire County Council. This council had to sell the house, our house, to pay off its debts. Except it wasn't to do that, was it? It was to fill the gap between income and expenditure in just 1 year only. And even now, finance is still being described as fragile. 38,000 potholes a year going unfilled. No medium-term projections for years 2, 3 and 4. The districts are publishing theirs, why not us? And the new auditors reporting to the Audit Committee only on the 13th of February, and I quote, "Although our risk assessment and work on the value for money conclusion has only recently started, we have identified areas that may present a significant risk in relation to the value for money conclusion for the Council. Those areas: financial planning in the medium term, preparations for local government reorganisation, and service performance, in particular children's services." Most bizarrely, the charge for a download of a single image from the online image library within Archives and Heritage for this year or next year, a fee of £9.30, is a new charge for 2021. What has happened to go from no charge to a fee of almost £10 overnight for a download? What's going on there? So, Conservative financial expertise, it's not been a success story, has it?
Thank you. Councillor Mercer.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to shed some brighter light on this situation. The fact is we're discussing the budget. We're not discussing the history some distance back. We are talking about a balanced budget, a budget that's going to put money back into reserves, a budget that leads to an increase in spending. What's not to like? Now, I was one of the councillors who came into the Cabinet a while ago to try and sort out what was seen as a very difficult situation. We did it. We did it. We sorted it out. We have got a council now that is functional, that is improving, and which has got a balanced budget, which is putting money into reserves. It's very hard to see a black image there, but if you try hard enough, you can see a black image in any room if you turn the lights off.
Thank you. Councillor Stone.
Thank you. I have to say that I am really disappointed in this budget, and I won't be supporting it. I understand the process, including scrutiny, has been a much more robust and more rigorous process than we are used to, and that is reflected in what's in front of us. But we are, first and foremost, public servants, and our duty is to serve the public. I've argued for years that we should have an outcomes-based approach to everything that we do. If we look at the outcomes of all the things that have been talked about, the administration's failure over the last 10 years, we will see in our communities the most extraordinary levels of want and the growing levels of lack of resilience. And I would like to invite some of the administration, come on a walkabout with me in one of my areas, and I will show you the impact of what you have been doing. So 47,000 children in our county living in poverty. How can you say this is a good budget? How can you say there is value for money in what you've been doing. We have got the most appalling numbers of children coming into care. A lot of those children should not be in care. They're in care because of the situation their families are finding themselves in, where all the supports they needed have been taken away. Life expectancy in disadvantaged areas going down. These are not outcomes that you could possibly be proud of, but they are outcomes that you have produced. I've got 3 questions on the budget, on the income, because one of the things I'm really interested in is the gap we've got between what is needed and what we've got, and that is not being shown in the budget. We need those figures because we need to know what our income generation need is. I want to ask how secure the figure against business rates is in the light of likely appeals. I want to ask what the commercial line, which shows £2 million, is. What is that commercial line, and why is it so tiny when our need is so great? I'd like to ask why the forecast collection for council tax has gone down. And I would like to ask, you know, when you're reflecting on this and you're talking to your children and your grandchildren about the legacy that you have left, what are you going to be saying to them in terms of the outcomes for our communities? The fact that you've let the people of this county down so very badly, and that you're now setting up a children's trust which is going to exemplify all the things that were ever wrong.
Thank you very much. Councillor Clark.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I rise to support what I think is, the word that's been used is robust about this budget. When you haven't got much in the bank to play with, there's not a great deal extra that you can spend. I think one of the lessons which has been learned over the last 20 months is that every council, particularly this one, has had to learn to cut its coat according to its cloth. It's a basic rule of life which affects most families. It had not been heeded in the past, and I think the change, if you like, on this journey that we've been on took place about 20 months ago. The recovery started 20 months ago. That actually coincides approximately with the time that I'd stood down from Cabinet. And I don't know whether the two are linked or not. Some would no doubt agree with that. However, I want to compliment the work done by my able successor, Councillor Longley, the officers, and the whole team that have put this together in the most difficult circumstances. We are on a journey. We are not necessarily travelling first class, but we're going to get to the destination, which will be May next year, and we will deliver this council in a completely different financial and overall position than we inherited it a few years ago. It will have reserves of over £40 million. That is something which I think was eye-watering and only to be wondered at perhaps in 2018. Mr. Chairman, I want to make a point about where our revenue comes from. Almost 90% of the revenue of the council now comes from local sourcing. That is a huge shift. We've experienced over the last several years a shift away from central government funding to council tax and business rates. That in itself, I think, is good. I believe in localism, and there should be more local accountability. However, and this is where I just want to fly a kite for future councils to examine, and that is the fact that we have our hands tied in this council, every council, with how much we can actually raise in council tax without a massive obstacle of a referendum. We're restricted to 2% increase, irrespective of the finances and the needs of the county. I would campaign strongly on the grounds of localism in future, Mr. Chairman, to lift that cap. Let the councillors up and down the country trust them to set appropriate council taxes for their needs. And if they rip the local people off and cost too much, the people always have the opportunity then to part company with them at the next election. But let us take local government out of the straitjacket it's in, Mr. Chairman. Let us return trust to local councillors from central government and really walk the talk as far as localism is concerned. I support the budget.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hakewell.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Mercer says it's not about the past, but he didn't hear the 4-chapter fairy tale that came from the Councillor Longley at the beginning. I don't know whether he was listening or he just prefers not to get involved with that. We weren't elected here, any of us, to reduce services, and whilst the semantics of whether it's a cut or not, whatever you say, there are less services, particularly when we talk about social care, than there will be tomorrow than there will be in the past. So that's absolutely clear. The most vulnerable people in the county, and even some of those that aren't so vulnerable, will be slipping and sliding around the roads, and I'm just hoping the same U-turn will happen on that Gritting, speaking as a very rural councillor. Commissioners say that this council is still fragile when asked to do so. The point is that this budget, and you talk about contingency, is going to be far more impacted by what happens outside this chamber with the national government. Points-based system. Everyone for years, and scrutiny on this council has said, if you take those people out who are prepared to come and look after our young and our old and our vulnerable and stop them coming in and put a wage bar, we will all suffer, and all of those people will suffer, and that's nothing to do with what's going along here. Councillor Clark says that the government should trust us. Well, by definition, clearly the government doesn't trust us, because this is a government-generated, face-saving budget. The underlying problem remains, and will remain for the 2 unitaries that come forward. The budget is here in black and white, colours that I quite like. The ballot box will determine how the residents of this county view this budget, and we will go out to those residents of the county and tell them exactly what the voting was and how things move forward in this council. My grandfather was elected here as an independent in 1934 and served 28 years, so Councillor Scrimshaw was talking about our predecessors in that particular point. Independent, I should have realised earlier, shouldn't I, as his grandson. What we need to do at the ballot box is to end the blues and have some different colours representing us in that way. The unitary solution is simply the Titanic when it hit the iceberg. There was a mutiny. Those who took control after the mutiny wanted to steer it, and then someone came up and said, let's chop it in 2, make 2 of them and see if 2 halves float better. And now I'm really worried to understand there's only 1 engine room. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hakewell. Councillor Smithers.
Thank you, Chairman. What a short memory Councillor Hakewell actually has. Anyhow, the success to building any team is putting good people around you. And I know both sides of this chamber have said today about the commissioners, the chief exec, the various officers and so on. And yes, it's been very, very good for us to have such a fantastic team around us. It's fundamental to the success of this authority. There's talk about the embarrassment about the Westminster and, you know, and the MPs saying, Councillor Scrimshaw was saying that, you know, they're embarrassed of us. But it goes hand in hand that, you know, they're working with us. We're working as an authority, a Conservative-led authority in Westminster and a Conservative-led authority in Northamptonshire, working together to get what's right for the electorate of Northamptonshire, which, whilst we're on that subject, they spoke really loud just recently, didn't they? Councillor Eels is gone, sorry. Okay. So let's look at the 3-year plan that Councillor Longley has put forward. You know, there's some real serious and straightforward messages there. Reserves up, things under control, increased spending, back on track. You know, these are the sort of messages that need to be put out there. I can't help, obviously, about the winter gritting. I am going to address that because that's part of the portfolio that I oversee. I can guarantee that we will ensure that our roads are kept safe and gritted throughout the season, and that is a statutory requirement upon us to do so. There's going to be no cars sliding all over the place, this mass hysteria that Councillor Hakewell was trying to lead to. But finally, it is a sad budget because it is the last budget that we will deliver here. And when we finally wrap up and leave this building and hand over to the 2 very competent unitary authorities and, you know, they take over the reins and so on, you won't find a note left here by the Conservative administration, saying, "I'm afraid there's no money left."
Thank you very much. Councillor Scrimshaw.
Excuse me. Thank you, Chairman. Before I start, I'd just like to comment on Councillor Clark's comments about funding coming locally. Absolutely true that governments are doing more and more towards this, but it does come with some risks. It's a case, isn't it, that where local demand is needed more, they tend to be councils with the lowest tax base. The councils with the highest tax base, where they can raise more money, are very often the councils that do not need it. And that's why sometimes that move is unfair. But I want to just go back, if I may, Chair, to the debate. Perhaps I didn't explain myself well enough earlier, as there seems perhaps there was a lack of understanding of the reality of the situation. We all know that as councillors, we cannot change what the commissioners decide, which is presumably why Councillor Stambra was able to embarrass the leadership over the hypocrisy about the winter gritting. This budget is not about securing the future of this of council services moving forward. It's purely about scraping through this council to the next year, and consequently it does not offer to inform, help or support local government locally in the future. There are still so many uncertainties around that. It leaves us in uncertain times as we move from the legacy of this council, and it's that legacy which leaves the responsibility of supporting this particular budget entirely with those responsible for it being needed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Golby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Labour Group can't deal with this, can they? Let's face it. When there's been issues with budgets in the past, it's been our budget. This time, when we've got a good budget in front of us, they're making out it's somebody else's. So let me just be clear. This is all of our budget in here. It's us as members. And I'm quite disappointed that, given it is the last budget, the Labour Group still can't find themselves to support it, even though it came out a month early. We've had a really good scrutiny session, of course, led by Councillor Scrimshaw. We've tried to listen, and things have changed throughout the budget between what came out and what we've got before us here. So I find it quite disappointed with some of the comments that have been made. Let's just look back a moment and take stock of where we've come from and what we've actually achieved as a group of members. We, you know, a couple of years ago, the wheels did come off. We made that commitment, I made that commitment when I became leader, that we can do everything in our power, that when we move into unitary, we will put the finances in the best position possible and the services in the best position possible. We know where the stress points are, where the focus needs to be in children's services. We talked about that earlier, but in terms of the financial journey we've been on, I think we're achieving and honouring that commitment. It's been a massive personal challenge for me. I've been really well supported by Cabinet, by Councillor Clark when he was Finance Portfolio and Councillor Longley. This has been an incredible journey, and the point has been made that this is about a teamwork. It's team, not just us members, not just the officers, not just the commissioners. We've all worked together, and we have we meet every week at our strategic coordination group, and we share and deal with the issues together. We've all supported each other without one particular part of that being dominant, and that has been a success, I think, a success of this administration, and something that I'm proud to stand before us today and talk about, something, again, about honouring that commitment, that we'll do everything we can to put the finances in the best place possible. Let's have a look at this budget. We've talked about it. There's growth in every area. Last year, the net figure was £417 million. This year, it's £447. That's growth in all the different areas. We've got the staff pay rise. We've got the investment in the pothole machines, which should make a massive, massive difference. That was us going to the commissioners and talking to the chief exec about saying, we want this in there for our residents, because they frankly deserve it. We've been dealing with the stress areas in the social care services. Let's do something to repay the residents. That's exactly what we've done. We've got a bigger contingency, and we're putting money back into reserves. If that's not laying a good solid foundation to move into unitary, then I don't know what is. And points been made about the people on the walls around here. I think we've got to look at where we are as a point in time and capture some of their pioneering spirit, if you like. and look at what we've got before us as a big opportunity to reset some of our priorities, look at the strategic priorities of Northamptonshire, what the needs are in terms of the public sector, to rewrite that book. And frankly, I'm not disappointed. I'm not sad that it's the last budget. I'm proud of what we've achieved. We've put things right, and we're honouring these people round the room as we move forward. And we've got to look at it as, let's put some ambition in, some opportunity, and use it as a big point in time to move everything in Northamptonshire forward. And I commend the budget to Council. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Auger.
Yeah, I suppose I should have gone before the leader, but thank you. Yeah, you can tell it's an election year, can't you, with all the barbs that are coming across, and many people know I don't like the party politics. I don't like that, but there's every fibre of my being is saying, go on, hit back. But it would probably be akin to having a spitting competition with a camel, and I don't really want to get into that, because actually I know most of you actually support this. Most of you Labour colleagues and Liberal Democrat colleagues who have worked hard with the Conservatives, certainly in scrutiny in my time there, which I hold very fondly, have worked really hard to improve services, to try to get budgets under control. And when Malcolm talks about a teamwork, actually you're part of that team. You are part of the success of this budget and getting a budget actually that will work for the people in this coming year. So I thank you. Thank you. That probably won't do me very good on the doorstep, but I thank you for your contribution to this budget. And one thing was said about the instability we have in modern politics, and you're right, there is great instability as to where is the money's going to come from. I know projecting forward last night, we had a meeting at Daventry and looked at our forward planning, and we see the grants drying up, and we don't quite know where all this money's going to come to pay for services. But do you know what this budget gives us? This budget gives us stability in difficult times, stability in uncertain times. And that's why I think we should be supporting it, because actually this is going to provide the services for our people in the coming year. The future, well, the unitary will have to look after itself. But for now, for this budget, we should be supporting it, because do you know what? It's probably the best possible budget we could have pulled together in the circumstances we are in. I am immensely proud of being a member of this group. I arrived when things were a little bit different. I remember apologising for the mistakes we've made as an administration. I'm not shy about doing that. But you know what? The journey since then has been really earnestly felt amongst us all. We are all public servants. We want to do the best. I don't care what colour we fly under. We want to do the best for our residents. And I promise you that is what we have done here. And I'm sure come the elections, the residents will see how hard we have worked to actually improve from a very difficult situation to get where we are today. So I hope we all support it, and let's go on and vote and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Longley, would you like to reply to those comments?
Right, well, good afternoon. Okay, we all set? Right. I think one of the things that's worth mentioning before I go into some of the responses is that we will remain, the collective we, will remain responsible for delivering whatever is in that budget, the details, and also the services, naturally, associated with that until May 21. Now, there's going to be a lot happening next year. There's going to be a lot of newbies coming in, get voted in May this year. But at the end of the day, we will remain responsible. And so I think that's worth saying here. So I think that I'm going to respond one by one, if that's okay. There's not a lot of detail here. Mike, your response, thank you very much indeed. I'm not sure there was a question in there. So I've got really nothing to reply to that one, because I think it was more of a statement than a question. So I'm going to move straight on from that one. Chris's amendment, I think I've spoken to that, Chris, and I will forever have that vision of you chasing a rabbit over a hill that doesn't exist. So thank you anyway. The theme that's come through here is, of course, the commissioners have put a huge amount of effort in, being there in the background. Our CEO goes without saying, our directorate, all the officers, but they put a huge amount in. They've done the bulk of the work, there's no doubt about that. But this is a team game, as I said before. Is all the cogs have got to get together. And I've actually got one of the easiest jobs going, I think, because I've got on my disposal, as it were, commissioners, long-standing, the CEO is a go-getter, a 151 officer who will take no nonsense from me or anybody else, and a team over there. So my job's pretty easy because you've got a good team. It's a bit like a football team, if you like, one better. You've got a striker here on my right, and you've got our goalie over there. He's sat up there in there, and I'm probably somewhere, I know, left back probably, but you're all part of the same team. So, and no one area has got to go wrong. You've got to support each other, and that's what's happened. And it's worked extremely well. And I don't bother Barry too much on situations. If it looks good to me, it's good. And I've got a lot of confidence in Barry. So that's how it works. Now, I think if we look to the to John here, John, I think you waxed lyrical for a moment. Again, I come back. It's a team game, John. But past is the past. I mean, we know that. I mean, if only we'd put it back another 5-6 years, and maybe we'd have a different view. But we can't. We are where we are, and we're talking about 3 years worth of really from the Armageddon, for want of a better term, and that's what I'm delivering today. We need to talk about the future. We all whinge about the past. Great shame, but there we are. We are where we are. So, I can't change that. Adam, thank you very much, Adam. Embarrassing. Thank you. Dennis, I thought I'd covered all that, what you said, the items you said, but hopefully I have. Sort of telling the people, getting people involved. Well, anybody that goes to Cabinet will get bored with what I say every time. I make the point that we do not have a monopoly on good ideas. Never will have, never have had. And so any ideas we were gratefully received from whatever quarter. And say every Thursday afternoon before Cabinet, it's open book. Anybody wants to hear it? So certainly the last 18 months, that's been an open area. Anybody wants to put anything in, that will remain so as far as I'm concerned. So that's not a fair thing to say that we don't listen on that. Bob, Children's Trust, if you want the detail of the numbers, you're going to have to, I can't give you them today, but I'm sure that the costs of that's pretty important, I agree. But they are available, as you probably already know. Andy, thank you, Andy. I thought that was another positive input. Thank you very much. Danielle, you asked me a number of technical questions. These are best brought to scrutiny, in my opinion. It's not really here that's appropriate. And I haven't got the detailed answer of that today, but they are available. If you want them, just send an email and we'll get that covered for you naturally. Okay. But the one point I would say on that is that we talk about outcomes, and I completely agree with you, outcomes are what it's all about. But to get any good outcome, you've got to have a solid financial base to start with. Once you've got that, you can do things, you know. But without that, you're scrambling around trying to make ends meet. You can't. So the objective these last few years has been to get that solid base. Now, it's not perfect even now, as I said earlier on in my presentation. But it's got better. It's just a darn shame we haven't got another 4 years. But there you are, we haven't. So that's that. Mike, positive, hamstrung, as you said. I think you're probably right, but there you are. That's, Jim, on the ballot box. Well, we'll see, won't we? That'll be what it'll be. Jason, I thought that was a good point. It is all about good people, of course it is. And I think I've tried to put that theme through all this morning. And when you're talking about gritting, I mean, the contingency is there. If we get a very severe winter and it goes badly wrong, you know very well that's where it's going to come from. Now, if we get a good winter, it won't. So, but you've got the ability to deal with it should it occur. And I think, Mike, well, I think scraping
We're coming towards the end of the allotted period.
Yeah, okay. Well, the only thing I would say to Mike is, beards are cheerful, what keeps you going? That's all I could say, you know. I don't see that there's anything I can add to that. So, folks, that's it. I hope you vote for this year's budget. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Keir. We now come to the vote on the budget report for 2020-2021, and it's a recorded vote.
Councillor Richard Auger. 4. Councillor Fiona Baker. 4. Councillor Jane Birch. Is Jane Birch? Abstain. Thank you. Councillor Lizzie Bowen. 4. Councillor Wendy Brackenbury. 4. Councillor Rebecca Breeze. 4. Councillor Julie Brookfield is absent. Councillor Adam Brown. 4. Councillor Robin Brown. 4. Councillor Pinder Chowan. 4. Councillor Michael Clark. 4. Councillor Julie Davenport is absent. Councillor De Capel-Brooke is absent. Councillor Gareth Eales is absent. Councillor Scott Edwards. 4. Councillor John Eakins is absent. Councillor Matt Golby. 4. Councillor Gonzalez de Savage is absent. Councillor Rob Goff. 4. Councillor Martin Griffiths. 4. Councillor Jim Hakewill. Against. Councillor Eileen Hales is absent. Councillor Mike Hallam is absent. Councillor Amy Howard is absent. Councillor Dudley Hughes is absent. Councillor Sylvia Hughes is absent. Councillor Cecile Irving-Swift. 4. Councillor Andrew Kilbride is absent. Councillor Graham Lawman. 4. Councillor Stephen Legg.
4.
4. Councillor Malcolm Longley. 4. Councillor Arthur McCutcheon. Abstain. Councillor John McGee. Abstain. Councillor Anna Matthews. 4. Councillor Andy Mercer. 4. Councillor Jill Mercer. 4. Councillor Dennis Meredith. Against. Councillor Ian Morris. 4. Councillor Sandra Naden Hawley. 4. Councillor Steve Osborne. 4. Councillor Bill Parker. 4. Councillor Suresh Patel. 4. Councillor Victoria Perry. 4. Councillor Anjona Roy. Abstain. Councillor Sam Rumans. 4. Councillor Adil Sadigov is absent. Councillor Bob Scott. Abstain. Councillor Mick Scrimshaw. Abstain. Councillor Shepherd is absent. Councillor Smith Haynes is absent. Councillor Jason Smithers. 4. Councillor Chris Stamborough. Against. Councillor Danielle Stone. Abstain. Councillor Winston Strachan. Absent. Councillor Michael Tye. 4. Councillor Alan Walker. 4. And Councillor Malcolm Waters. 4. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The result of the vote is that the motion is carried, 31 votes for, 4 against. I've no exempt items. Sorry, I'll ask Paul to read it out so it's exactly right.
31 for, 3 against, 7%.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah. Are you happy, Councillor Hakewill? Thank you very much.
Very happy.
I have no exempt items, so at 12:45 I declare the meeting closed. And thank you all.